Thank you very much. And what I'll do is I'll actually hand over to Stuart from the Amy Gillett Foundation.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, everyone, for jumping on. This is, I always get a bit excited when we sort of step in and do an intro for these. I am here in Melbourne. So I'm Stuart Outhred from the Amy Gillett Foundation. We're headquartered in Melbourne, which is the land of the Kulin Nation. So would love to pay my respects to elders past, present, and acknowledge the land that you're all on, which is all around the country. So just the chat is very impressively lighting up with Wollongong and Perth and Cairns and everywhere in between. So I love seeing that. I'm just here for a few minutes, really just to say hi and welcome. So on behalf of the foundation, we have established this program. It's called the Safe Cycling Program. Really proud to be delivering it in partnership with the federal government. And it's all about building up the capability and the capacity of our transport and roads and streets sector. So that's you all. If you're here, Matt Gardner from Arup. G'day, Matt. I remember meeting you about 10 years ago. It's bizarre when that happens. The program is really is aimed at improving the system that delivers streets, because our core focus is on improving safety for people on bikes, and growing participation in bike riding. Not just people that put a costume on and ride around on a Saturday morning, riding a bike to kinder, to school, to the shops, to the movies, just for all trips. So we firmly believe that safety is key to that. Improving safety, improving safe infrastructure is a huge part of this whole task, which is why we've partnered with Safe System Solutions. So these modules that you're about to step through over the next few sessions are really aimed at improving your knowledge and understanding of best practice cycling infrastructure. And we want you to go and roll it out all across the country. So thank you again. Make sure you get the most out of this session and the ones to come, because you're in extremely capable hands with Max, Marissa, and Ainsley, and the rest of the Triple S team. So enjoy it. Tell us what you think, and tell all your friends to do the remaining sessions that are sort of coming through early next year as well. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stuart. So feel free to reach out to Stuart and Amy Gillett Foundation for any of that feedback, or liaise directly through our training team if you've got any questions about the course content or how to progress through it. But we'll do a little introduction as part of today's session, just so you've got all that administrative understanding. I also just wanted to echo Stuart's acknowledgement of country. I'm also on Wurundjeri Wurrung land today. So people of the Kulin Nations, who are once the traditional custodians of this land, I'd like to pay my respect for those past, present, and emerging leaders, and also pay my respect to any First Nations people dialing in today, and of all the lands that we are covering today as well. Now, there's a few things that I just wanted to make a note about this course and the way that we run. So we have set up these modules that have got specific themes or focuses. Today's theme will be off-road cycling facilities. And the way that we have collected our resources, because we are tapping into lots of different jurisdictions, so we're covering the nation, we're not just focusing on how Queensland would implement their cycling infrastructure, or Western Australia or Victoria. We've actually reviewed jurisdictional research and guidance documents from around the country, and we've kind of handpicked what we would consider best practice, states that are particularly leading within that space, and not only building the safest cycling options, but also designing and getting that framework of safe cycling infrastructure embedded into their cultures. So you will see things that perhaps look different to your jurisdictions, and that's okay. We're just presenting you the principles, and then you as designers or practitioners within this space would just need to translate that for your jurisdiction. So just rest assured, you're not seeing just one particular state. You'll get to see how others are operating within this space as well. I will share my screen and start heading through some of the content for today. So as mentioned, we will be going through off-road cycling facilities. This is generally considered, the gold standard for bike riders. If you are able to get the cycling community away from the carriageway and riding in a facility that is exclusively for them, that's definitely your best outcome, because we know that lots of riders don't like to be near vehicles and they find it stressful to be, within the carriageway. So if you do have that land available to take the adjacent verge outside of the carriageway, then that is definitely considered a fantastic outcome. For those who got in early, you may have noticed that we record our webinar sessions. The reason for that is just in case you are unable to make a session, or if you have to duck out of today's session, that's okay. We acknowledge that the world keeps spinning even as we try to engage you for the next 2 hours and go through all this content, and things may pop up. You may have to go pick up the kids or, attend an urgent email, and that's completely fine. So we do have recordings of the webinars, and we share that on our learning management system, where you can, rewatch any of the content when it's convenient for you. So don't be too nervous if you do have to, or you're unable to make a session. Of course, we strongly encourage you to come to the live sessions just so you can participate in the chat and you can see how others are finding the course and questions that they're asking and things like that. So yeah, we strongly recommend coming in live, but that is the option there for you. Our moderator today is the wonderful Marissa, and I'll hand over to you to do an introduction.
Hi, thanks, Max, and hello, everyone. My name is Marissa Garusto. I'm a training coordinator here at Safe System Solutions. I work very much behind the scenes in coordinating all of our training programs and your enrollment process, and your helping all of our training programs come to life as to what you're seeing now. So if you do have any admin or logistical issues throughout the next 2 weeks over the 4 modules, please get in contact with me. Our email address is there on the screen there, training@safesystemsolutions.com.au, and you would have already received several emails from us. So please get in contact for anything at all. For any time you can't make a session, or even if you please get in contact if you have any technical issues today or during any of the webinars. The best and easy quickest fix is usually just to leave the webinar and then just join right back in. That seems to fix the problem 99% of the time, but if you do any major dramas, a quick reboot usually does a trick also. If you have any questions today for Max or for myself or for Ainsley, please, there is a Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen, which Max is just highlighting there. There is a Q&A function. Please pop your questions in the Q&A. That we have our wonderful Ainsley here, who you'll meet in a moment, and she will be behind the scenes, as will I, entering your questions. And we can also shoot over to Max at any point for any of the questions. Any of the general chat or interaction, please, you're welcome to use the chat function. If you'd like to make any comments about any of the content that Max is presenting, or Max might also ask for your interaction, and we'll use the chat function there. But any particular questions that you'd like answered, please pop them in the Q&A. The PDF slides, yes, so we have our learning management system, which we'll take you through in a moment. If you do you happen to miss any of the content today, all of the slides are available on our learning management system. Back over to you, Max.
Thank you, Marissa. And I can see that you're in a very bright, colourful room behind you there. Did you want to suggest we talk
Yeah,
about?
I am. Are they catching your eye? Do you want one?
I
Superman or
do. I really want one.
shoot it over to you. Just grab it from the prize pit behind me. I'm in the prize pit. Why am I in the prize pit? So Max is loves to grab your attention and he's looking for all of your interactions. So he's going to shoot plenty of questions over to the group and a few little online activities that he likes to do with you. And the best answers or the winners or any of the above get a prize. Now, I promise you it's not going to be a Superman or a Batman. We have a whole little stock room of prizes, which we like to send out to you. So please get involved. Max loves to hear your questions and we'll also even just shoot someone a prize for just a fantastic question that he likes to hear. So yeah, that's why I'm in the prize pit. So get involved, everyone.
Awesome. First question of the day. Casey Council didn't receive the welcome pack.
No.
Will it impact on the training? And the
No,
answer is
not
no.
at all. There is
No.
nothing that you need urgently, and anything that you do need is on the LMS, but I will make sure that I'll to chase up where your welcome packs are. So thank you for letting me know.
I think that's the first prize of the day, Marissa. How easy is that?
Prize to you. You didn't get your welcome pack on time. So now we're going to get a whole bunch of people saying, I didn't get mine. Oh, my children ate mine. I'll send mine over to you, Prue.
Very good. And if you are in the chat, you can actually change where it says to. If you click on to everyone, it just means all your peers are able to see your chat comments rather than just the hosts and panelists. Thank you, Marissa. I might hand over now to Ainsley to also just do a brief little introduction as well.
Yep, thank you, Max. Hello, everyone. My name's Ainsley. I work as an assistant project manager here at Safe System Solutions. So one of the engineers in the team here. So yeah, I've joined today to help out with the moderating, just to answer any questions that you have in the Q&A. So yeah, any questions that you have that pop up in the session, if we can't answer them directly, we'll pass them on to Max and he will address them. But if you have any questions that arise outside of the webinar, also if you send them through to the training email, they will likely get directed to us to help you out at any point throughout the course. So feel free to reach out at any time.
Thank you, Ainsley. Yes, my name is Max McArdle, for those that haven't met. I'm the Engineering Operations Manager, Senior Engineer at Safe System Solutions. I started my career at the Department of Transport, or VicRoads as it was called then, as a graduate. Worked there for many years and got involved in the Safer Pedestrian Cyclist Fund and looked at prioritising different cycling projects across Victoria and look at which ones were to be awarded funding and things like that. Also got involved in the technical guidelines space and helped develop some of the resources that we're coincidentally going to be going through today. Of course, I'm going to say that that's the best practice because I helped write some of that. But anyway, yeah, so I have been involved within the cycling space for many years now. And in terms of my own cycling ability, I'm not one of those lycra-clad riders. I generally just ride for recreation, for leisure, and just as a means to get from A to B. I just think it's a wonderful, investment within our community to be able to spruik cycling, and anything that we can do to get the high participation rates and better safety for our riding community, I think it's just a wonderful thing, because we know all the terrific benefits, health benefits, mental well-being, environmental, better social equity and things like that. So yeah, I'm all for this. It's not just training that I deliver because it's part of my job. I'm very passionate within this space, and yeah, very excited to hear your own experiences, both as a rider or trying to invest in cycling infrastructure, and hearing your own stories. So please do share your own experiences. Now, the gentleman next to me there is our principal engineer, Ken Beer, for those that have not met him before. He has also helped craft this course, and he will actually be joining us on Thursday to help deliver some of this content. Now, Marissa already alluded to our learning management system, and I have got a little demonstration at the end of today's session where we can just have a look at, see what that feels like. Hopefully you've already received an email with your login details to the learning management system. All of our contents, the recording for the webinar, all the quizzes and assignments and things like that, it's all hosted on there. So we don't just go back and forth in emails and potentially lose things. Everything is hosted on there. So if you don't have access to that, you won't be able to complete your course. So please ensure you are able to log in there. Now, to make sure that we've got you engaged for the next couple hours, we do like to include this little fellow here. We call him Wally the Wombat. And basically, he's going to randomly pop up throughout today's presentation. And your job will be to just take a tally of how many times you spot Wally. The reason for that is, you know, it's very, very easy to have these things running up in the background and then answering emails or, you know, focusing on other activities. But we're just trying to encourage you to keep your eyes on this screen here and listening to the presentation. So keep a lookout for our friend Wally. He's going to be hidden amongst the slides today. And one of the quiz questions for today will be, how many times did you see Wally? So if you want to get that 100%, you've got to make sure that you're staying on the screen.
And is this one, are we counting this one as one, Max?
No, good point. This one is not counted in the tally. So you're currently at 0 Wallies. 0. But make sure you keep a lookout. Now, we do have minimum competency requirements in order to successfully complete this course. So we do require you attending or viewing all of the webinars. So we've got a record that you've actually, you know, been present for all of the content that we've gone through. We need to see that you've completed all the set tasks. So we've got two quizzes and 2 assignments. One includes a site visit. We'll explain each of those after each module, so we don't need to bore you with all the information at the moment. However, yeah, we can go through that after each session. Now, we do have a minimum 80% pass mark on all our quizzes and assignments. That is a relatively high standard. It's certainly much higher than when I was at university to be able to pass a course. However, the reason that we have that expectation is we're not really trying to set everyone up for failure. Like, we're not setting philosophical questions or trying to you know, deliberately make things incredibly complex. What we're marking people on is their understanding of the safe cycling infrastructure terminology, ability to identify hazards, and just showing competence in skills to, you know, address cycling risks and know the infrastructure that is known to improve the safety for our riding community. So I strongly recommend, if you are struggling with any of the content or you found that you haven't got the marks that you need, please just reach out to us directly and we can provide one-on-one coaching. We do allow up to 3 attempts. So if after the first attempt you're not getting the answers that you require, give us a call and we'll help you get through that. Because if we were to fail any of our participants, it's also a failure on us as teachers that are aiming to, you know, convey these skills. All right, I've already done a lot of talking and I do like more engagement. So I'm already going to launch the first poll of today. And this one is not marked. So if you get any of these polls in our webinar sessions, rest assured, it's just for our own information. So we've got a bit of an idea of who's attending, but it's not, you're not graded on this. So the question, which looks like it's already popped up for lots of people, is please rate your level of cycling infrastructure knowledge. And the 4 tiers that we've listed there are very knowledgeable, aware but don't know much, not aware. So you can also move that poll box around if that's in your way. Move to a different screen and things like that. But I'll just let that run in the background and chat you through the agenda for today. So as I mentioned, we are focused on off-road facilities today. Most commonly, they involved shared paths where, the riding community share that with pedestrians or walkers. And the shared path design, in particular, the elements that we'll be focusing on are things like our width of the facility, the gradients, hazards adjacent the shared path, sight lines for both vertical and horizontal geometry, as well as fencing. So those are the kind of high-level items that we'll be looking at as part of today's session. Inevitably, there are instances where our shared path network will cross over with the carriageway. And we've also just want to talk about, well, how can we manage that interaction and what would be considered best practice within that space? So where you've got your shared path crossing over the road network. So we talk about cyclist priority treatments, have a good discussion around bollards, and also just make a note of DDA requirements. Finally, the last little sub-module, I suppose you could call it, is where we've got shared paths that interact with other shared paths. And we talk about wayfinding signage and managing cyclist speeds at these conflict points. So quite a bit of content to get through. We will pause halfway just to have a bit of a break and have a stretch and things like that. So stay with me for the next half an hour or so, and we'll just jump straight into this. So shared path design, the way that we've come up with this kind of philosophy is, acknowledging that those who are riding and those who are walking generally don't want to be near the carriageway. They want to be off-road. So they want to be behind the curb and channel, okay? However, where you have really, really high volumes of riders and also really, really high volumes of pedestrians, it's a much better outcome to provide separate facilities for both of those users rather than a shared path. So this example that I've actually showing on this photo here is not an example of a shared path, because this facility here where the riders are, that is an exclusive off-road bicycle lane. So bicycles, riders can travel in both directions along there. And pedestrian traffic are much closer to the foreshore there. And, they've got a clearly separate delineated zone. Now, of course, in practice, you do have pedestrians that use this space as well. And that's okay. But it is actually trying to demarcate these two different road users, where pedestrians, you can use that space over there because you're got a different needs, and the way that you interact with the environment is different to how the riding community would interact with this space. So riders within this space, this is a very, very popular commuter route. This goes into the Melbourne CBD, and it's has lots of riders that are traveling at relatively high speeds, 25 kilometers per hour and above. And if this were to become a shared path, it just becomes increasingly uncomfortable for both our riders and our pedestrians sharing that space, because you'll have cyclists kind of meandering in and out of traffic and, potentially running into oncoming cyclists, and it can get very stressful. So just wanted to highlight that although we advocate for shared paths, if you've got very high volumes of pedestrians and riders, you can actually look to separate those users even further. Now, to give you some actual evidence to help support that statement, I've included this figure here. So this is from the Austroads Guide to Road Design, Part 6A. And just as a reference, for those that ever need to reference these figures and photos and graphs that we will be showing, we do include the source. So nice and easy for you to just do a quick Google, copy paste, and then hopefully be able to find this figure that I'm showing at the moment, which is figure 5.4. So you can grab some additional information if that's required. So we're not just, putting out random information. We're trying to back that up so you can check us on that. Anyway, what I'm showing here within this figure is along the y-axis, it is saying the number of pedestrians two-way per peak hour. So that's just the volume of pedestrians. Along the x-axis, we've got the number of cyclists two-way per peak hour. Now, I'm not going to go through every single quadrant of this graph. I just want to, give you the main learnings that you can take from this kind of information. And I'm going to look to the far extremes for both the pedestrian volume and cyclist volume. So if I look basically right at the top corner, which is I've got lots and lots of pedestrians and lots of cyclists, it's actually recommending we install a 4-meter wide bike path and a 4-meter wide footpath. So it's not suggesting that we just have one super wide shared path area. Instead, it's saying, no, let's put riders in this space here, make it 4 meters wide, and pedestrians over here 4 meters wide, separating those two users. So an important clarification there. So we don't always have to be trying to share our paths. In fact, you can see this blue area there is where a 3-meter shared path is being recommended. And you can see as the pedestrian numbers get higher, above 100, that's when we're already looking at getting our separation between the two. So very, very helpful if you are in the position of currently working out what your future network could look like. If you're into any of that strategic planning, this is a wonderful figure to help guide that next stage of development. Another very common reference is also out of the same document, which suggests what are typical widths for shared paths. And the way that they have categorized these paths are these 3 terms here, which is a local access path, a regional path, or a recreational path. Now, unfortunately, there is very limited definitions to actually clearly demarcate what the difference between each of these is. So I'll give you the practitioner's kind of translation of this. There is, of course, information within the Austroads that supports this, but as I said, it's relatively vague. So the local access paths is what's shown in this left diagram or left photo here. And you can think of it as a local street. It's not meant to have high volumes of pedestrian or cyclist traffic. Instead, it just provides a very small, probably residential access to that specific part of the network. So you wouldn't expect that to have a throughput of traffic there. Now, you may have noticed that the minimum width that is being recommended there is a 2-meter wide path. However, I really don't think that that is an appropriate thing to be recommending. I think that's an incredibly narrow path and not really going to service the needs of pedestrians or our riders. So if we just take a look at this photo here, and this is a 2-meter wide path, you can see because we've got, that utility pole that narrows things up, we've got this fence here that narrows things up. We've got those 2 people walking side by side, and there's no space whatsoever for someone on a bicycle to ride past. So 2 meters doesn't really cut the mustard, so to speak. Instead, we should be going for the upper limit. In fact, with all of these types of path arrangements, we would obviously recommend starting with the upper limit, and where you're unable to meet that, demonstrating, and recording why that cannot be achieved before heading to any of those minimums. Okay, so that's the local access path. Our regional path, this does have more of a commuter focus, so you will expect to see a larger population of the cycling community using these routes. And the 3 meter width there, I've got to say, is a pretty common one to see across the regional paths. Now, this is where it gets very, very vague, the regional and recreational, the difference between the two. From what I've seen, the recreational does have a bit more land use attractions adjacent the path, so playgrounds and things like that. So you may have people picnicking within the area, or parents with strollers and things like that, but it's also a path that's used recreationally. So it doesn't exclusively have just a commuter function. But in my mind, they're very, very similar, the regional, recreational, and it would be dependent on your jurisdiction. It's likely you also have your own definitions for your cycling corridors and the way that you actually categorize that. So this is just at a national level, but your specific jurisdiction may have your own ways of saying this is what we would call that, and that's completely fine. You would need to reference your jurisdictional guidelines over this. I'll check in with Ainsley and Marissa if I've missed any questions so far.
Yeah, I've got a question, Max. Is there any requirement for separation between the bike path and footpath, or can they be hard up against one another? Good
question. Let's give a prize out there. I think if you could provide physical separation, you're much more likely to be able to achieve those two users using their separate paths. The more you try and squeeze it in, and even if you're just doing like line marking to separate the two, it just becomes a lot easier for a pedestrian to go into the bicycle path or the bicycle to go into the pedestrian area. So making it as delineated or demarcated as possible, I'd certainly be recommending physical measures. Landscaping is a great one. Make it look pretty, even using like a little grass strip, something like that. But yeah, that's just a general rule of thumb there.
One from Luke, when picking the best width type, would you use the average weekday volume, AM or PM peak, or a peak weekend volume, assuming the weekend is normally higher than the weekday but less often?
Good question. I would tend to take worst case scenario. So I would take, if I had all that data available, I would take that window that is showing the highest levels of usage. Yeah. Prize out there as well, Marissa.
Okay, will do.
See how easy it is.
I know, it's that easy to grab a Batman.
Yeah.
I'll shoot over to Ainsley.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Marissa. I think, Max, this is a broad one, but just in terms of when we do have separated cyclist and pedestrian paths, what are some of the strategies to stop pedestrians walking along or wandering into the cyclist path?
Yeah, I know it is challenging. Making it, yeah, I guess, as I said before, the physical separation. So you've got clearly the pedestrian area there, and then clearly the bicycle area. I'm actually a fan of using the green conflict paints much more regularly than just at conflict points. So actually having the green paint even at mid-block sections where there isn't necessarily the conflict. And I know that is against standards, but I think standards are evolving. So I think just having that reminder that green, that's for the cyclists, I'm going to stay away from that, is another kind of reminder to other users that I'm going to stick to my zone. But I don't think you're ever going to get 100% compliance, because ultimately people will do whatever they want and go wherever they want. So it's not really one for enforcement either. I think it's just a fact of living with the peculiarities of human beings. Anything else there, Ainsley? Or
I think otherwise all good for now. Thanks, Max.
wonderful. Alrighty, so we'll get stuck into our gradients now. And generally, when we are thinking of our gradients for shared path design, we're pretty concerned about the uphill gradient because we know that generally most riders don't like cycling up hills. I'm one of those riders. I actively, check my route prior to getting on the bike to make sure that there's nothing too hilly because I'm just not built for that. And so I will actually go out of my way to ride a flatter route. So we do know that, there's this figure that's been produced many years ago that has kind of demarcated what would be acceptable for the cycling community to comfortably be able to ride up and, what would be desirable. So there's two different tiers there. The desirable is that solid line and the acceptable is the dotted. Now, once again, I'm not going to go through every single computation that you could get out of this, but I'll just show what this graph is telling as a story. So along the y-axis, we've got the length of the gradient. So basically how far is that slope? And along the x, we've got our gradient percent. The higher the gradient, the steeper the slope. What that is saying. If I just pick a random number, I'll pick, say, a 10% gradient. That's really, really steep. Like, for those that are not familiar with gradients, that's like, you would notice that even like walking or anything. Like, that will absolutely burn your calves. At about 10%, it's saying desirable length of that gradient, if that was a nice straight line, it's around the 10-meter mark. So it's basically saying if you've got a 10% slope, don't make it longer than 10 meters because your riders may not even use this facility. So yeah, that's just what this graph is trying to tell you. But I think it's also important to reflect on the other aspect whereby generally shared paths are bi-directional, so you can travel both ways. So if you've got a cyclist that's traveling uphill at 10%, then they will also be expected to travel downhill at that 10% as well. And that leads in nicely to this next little figure that we've shown here. So we can see here, this is kind of like an overpass structure for the shared use path. So they cross over this busy arterial road and don't have to deal with all that traffic over there, which is great. But they do have these ramps that bring them back down to kind of that, shared path level again. I'll open up to the chat and I will pose a question and you just need to chuck your answer in the chat. And I suppose what I'm interested in is, are there anything about this particular site that could be concerning if you were a rider traveling down this path here? So I'll give you 30 seconds. Just have a little look at this photo here and think about if you were riding down this path, what could be an issue with this example? All right, I can see lots of answers absolutely coming through, which is fantastic. Faster than I can read them, in fact. DDA landings, yes. They are installed. They are a requirement as part of the Disability Discrimination Act to be able to install them. So you can kind of tell from this photo that it's kind of Actually, I might just draw it in a elevation profile, but it's got like a ramp and then a landing, then a ramp, then a landing, then a ramp, then a landing. That kind of thing there. You know, ideally, of course, you'd have a nice smooth slope for riders, but we do have other, you know, constraints, which is the DDA. So we need to ensure that we're providing for all users of that area. So not the biggest risk that I had in mind there, but it's good to mention that. Fading of the paint, the speed of the cyclists, absolutely. Seen a few notes about the handlebars and the rails, and why you've got these kind of two layers of handlebars. I do talk about fencing in a bit, so that might help to alleviate that concern. Priority at the merge at the bottom, absolutely. Yeah, if it's dark as well, that's a really good point. Be a bit confusing, but one of the ones that I was mostly alluding to is, yes, the speed of the cyclist. So if you were to just let gravity take you down this ramp, don't apply the brakes, it's likely by the time you reach the toe of this ramp, you'd be traveling 25, 30 kilometers per hour, just using good old-fashioned gravity, because of the way that this geometry is set up. And as many people have noticed, near the base of this ramp is actually a connecting shared path. So you've got a conflict point right where you've got cyclists that are traveling at fairly high speeds. Now, another thing that really would be considered, you know, quite a risky scenario is these handrails and the facade that we can see there. It actually acts as a wall. So you've got really limited sight lines. And I saw that mentioned a few times as well. So you've got a few elements in play there. You've got a conflict point where our cyclists are traveling at relatively high speed. So their ability to slam on the brakes or react to any potential conflicts is significantly reduced. And you've also got limited sight lines. So it's not easy to see that conflict point either. And there's no clear priority as to which shared path user would give way to who. So really good feedback and analysis from lots of people there. Marissa, I'll leave it to you to pick a couple of winners there. But lots of good insights there. Now, for those who have ever done any geometric design, you'd be familiar with this idea of an operating width or an envelope. We have envelopes for passenger vehicles and heavy vehicles, basically articulate exactly the dimension requirements and clearances for that specific user. Well, our bicycle riders have a similar operating width. And the way that that is defined is we just take a nice, easy 1 meter. Of course, there's lots and lots of different, you know, bicycle arrangements. Some are a lot taller than this. Some are a lot shorter than this. Some handlebars are much, much wider. Things like that. So this is generally just taken as the average. But as time goes on and as the fleet changes, I'm sure we'll see changes to these dimensions as well. But this is generally what we work with. We work with a 1 meter operating width. The head clearance as a minimum that we like to provide is a 200 mil above where the rider is seated. And where that becomes most relevant is if you have got, you know, shared paths that cross underneath roads, or they use existing culverts to get through specific areas and things like that. That's when that head clearance would be most useful. The other important thing to note is where you may see the clearance from hazards. So it's got these two different desirable and minimum. The 0.5 meter is pretty consistent across all jurisdictions. So anything that is 0.5 meter away from the operating width of the bicycle rider and is a fixed object is generally considered a hazard. the 0.2 or the 200 mil minimum there would be more referring to things that are not fixed or are flexible in nature, and they're not going to destabilize a cyclist. So just refer to the half meter then. Now, I've also referred to bicycle speeds here as well, just so you've got a bit of an idea of how different classifications of cyclists may be traveling. Now, appreciate this wording may not be the exact same that you would use here. Like, for instance, recreational cyclist, to me, I'd probably switch those two terms, commuter and recreational. To me, commuter would travel faster. Anyway, generally between 20 kilometers per hour would be a pretty standard speeds for on-road. If you're looking at shared paths, you're looking more at 10 to 20 kilometers per hour. And anything above that would, be on road and riding in bicycle lanes and things like that. The second source that I've included there is from the Global Designing Cities Initiative. And we do have a link to that on our LMS. We haven't actually provided you the resource document itself, because the way that they've set up is you have to log in to their system, and they just like to know basically who's downloading this and where you're coming from. So we didn't want to steal that marketing opportunity from them. But it's a really, really good document. It looks all over the world and has a look at how they are developing their cycling infrastructure. And you can have a look at, how Sao Paulo does it in South America, and, how Copenhagen does things and things like that. And it's a very, very useful kind of toolbox. So highly recommend you downloading that one. I touched on briefly hazards and when they would be, what kind of distance from the operating width would they be considered a hazard. Kind of more commonly, the approach to use is, if you look at the edge of a shared path and you measure half a meter back, whoop, I don't know what happened there. Anyway, that says 0.5. Anything that is fixed within that space will generally be considered a hazard. Okay, so that's the more practical way of interpreting the figures that I showed previously. So take your edge of your shared path. If you're doing any CAD work, just do a half meter offset line and pick up any features that are within that space. And if they're fixed, then they could be considered a hazard for the cycling community. Now, common ones that you'll have are bins. This is a clear opportunity of where, this could have just been flipped over and had the pole installed not within the shared path, but closer to the verge or the parkland there. Another really common one in the middle here is showing the lack of batter. So you can see the full depth of that concrete is clearly exposed. So I'm guessing when the contractor went out there, that's where their form was, and they took off their form, and then they didn't backfill anything. And that kind of 120 mil drop off is, significant enough whereby if you were to become an errant rider within that space, it's very unlikely you'd be able to make your way back onto the path. Instead, you're probably going to fall off and potentially end up in the drink over there. So this is just a simple one where you just ensure that, your contractors are aware that they need to backfill up to the top surface level of your path there. Another really common one is utility poles, even traffic signal hardware and things like that. They can be situated very, very close to the edge of the path. If you're able to, obviously maintain that half meter offset at all stages along the alignment, that's definitely the best case scenario. But just to show you what else has been done, I've seen things like flexible bollards being used just to help demarcate fixed hazards. So this is a gantry support, and you can see that narrows the shared path there. And the way that they've kind of mitigate this as a risk is they've installed these flexible bollards, just so those riding along know that there's a pinch point there, and things are becoming a little bit narrow at this stage. Of course, if you are reviewing things like this within the design stage, or you're designing these things yourself, you wouldn't go straight to this. You would instead be going, okay, I know that I'm not getting my half-meter offset there. Let's instead, shift this across, use the embankment there, maybe build some retaining wall just to make sure it's all structurally sound. And then you've got a nice, consistent width for your shared path all the way through there. All right, for those also in the design space, you may have within your time done some sightline design checks. So things like stopping sight distances or bit of approach sight distances, things like that. Just included this to let you know that there are also cycling sightline requirements. Follows a very, very similar calculation. So it's nothing too daunting or anything like that, just different coefficients being used. But things that you'll need to make assumptions of is, the speed of the cycling community within there. You do estimate what friction coefficient you're going to use, and generally just take worst case scenario, which is in wet conditions, as well as the grade of the path and all those types of things. Now, your sightline requirements are important for both your horizontal geometry, so looking around curves, and also vertical geometry, so looking over a crest and things like that. And just to paint a little bit of a picture here, so this is an example of horizontal geometry, whereby we've got this cyclist here that is turning around the bend, and if there were to be some form of hazard on that path, it's important that they have got adequate time to be able to stop so that they don't collide with that hazard. So it's the same principles and philosophy as what we do when we're looking at road design and we do our sightline checks, just applied to our shared path network. Now, in practice, this is generally what you could be doing. So this photo is actually of a shared path. It may not look like it, but this is completely sealed. And if you were riding along here, you can appreciate, because you've got that overgrown vegetation there, you can't really see what's happening beyond that bend. So if there were a fallen over log, or, there's a cyclist that's on the ground there, and you're just traveling along here, and you may have no idea that that is there. So that's where those sightline requirements kind of come into play. All you'd need to be doing is, if you're within that design space, just checking what type of landscaping is going there, how big does it get, and even considering just doing some vegetation trimming just to help open up the sight lines there. I've got, just thinking, now I might pause here actually. I'll check in, see if we've got any questions.
I might let Ainsley shoot off first.
Yeah, no worries. So Max, just a quick one, just about the different grades. Is there any kind of, I guess, guidance or parameters around what would be considered an easy grade? Is that kind of 0 to 3%, and then 4 to 6 is good, and 6+ is difficult, particularly when you're doing a shared path design? Or is it just kind of dependent on the environment of the shared path?
Good question. Yeah, so I think what you classified there was a pretty good analysis. There probably is a jurisdiction out there who has actually set their own categorization. I couldn't tell you at the top of my head, but yeah, I think 0 to 3 is fairly reasonable to write. However, there is a note that anything higher than 5% within the Austroads guide, so anything that's higher than 5%, they don't actually recommend for downhill grades, because cyclists can actually quite quickly lose control at those higher grades.
Perfect. That sounds great. I think that's all from me for now.
Excellent. Well, we will actually just pause there. So for those that want to go get a cup of tea or a coffee or beverage of your choice, or just have a stretch, I'm going to take a 4-minute break. So I will be back on here and we'll deliver the rest of the module in 4 minutes. Okay, so enjoy your break. Welcome back, everyone. I just saw a few questions in the chats. In regards to grades, if over the max grade and length, we stop calling it a shared path. It's 15%. That's super, super hilly. I haven't seen it not called a shared path because of that. I think it's just, this is the principle, basically. It's acknowledging that people feel uncomfortable riding in such a steep grade, but it's not saying, you know, yeah, there's just a million different ways you can interpret that. Because the other, as I said, this is what you would take as the principle. If, you know, you can, I mean, you can theoretically get much flatter grades, but if that's going to cost the 300 times the project cost, then is that really a good outcome for the community? I would say probably not. Yeah, so I don't think that really answered your question, but you would probably still call that a shared path, yes. Do I think that the current standards will be updated to include e-bikes, or do you think a separate standard guideline is needed? So yes, I definitely do think that they will be probably producing a standalone document with regards to e-mobility devices. I do tend to think that they belong more so with the cycling traffic, as opposed to putting them on the traffic lanes or making them mix on the footpath or things like that. So that would be my bet, that they would just try and work within that existing space, the shared path. But yeah, we can wait and see what jurisdictions come up with. And Stephanie asking, if child cyclists in a hilly environment greater than 5%, people already ride, would you argue that they should have a dedicated separated path then? So yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of principle whereby you're trying as best you can as project leads or project developers to develop an environment that will be as attractive as possible for the cycling community. If that means, you know, cutting down batters, installing retaining walls and getting rid of crests and things like that, and you're able to do that with your funding, then by all means would be going for that. But it's just tends to be sections where I would still be advocating for, let's try and just get something in there, as opposed to let's wait for funding that could or could not arrive. Because we know that even if you provide it, and say a child has to get off their bike and push their bike up to get to the top of the hill, it's still a better outcome than having them not use their bicycle at all or riding on the road. So there's always that, you know, which is a better case scenario. And I tend to say that build something that's better than nothing. Anyway, I'll keep going. The next little section is on fencing, and generally where we know that we require fencing is where we've either got a steep batter, which is shown on the right-hand side there. So just think like, you know, like a cliff or something like that. Or there's a sharp vertical drop. So those are the two instances where we typically install our fencing. Now, for those not too familiar with these tables and things like that, don't be too stressed or anything. I'll chat you through it, but you know, you can always leave this technical things for those that feel very comfortable in it. Basically, we've got X, which is our distance from the edge of the path to wherever the hinge point or the vertical drop is. And we've got Y, which is just the height of that drop. So our first kind of category here, we've got fence is not required where X is less than 2 and Y is less than 250 mil. And the reason that it's saying a fence isn't required is because we should be actually just battering off the surface. And what I mean by that is just filling in this gap and kind of flattening it out. Don't worry about a fence, just use natural fill. So that's what that first kind of category is saying there. The next two categories are referred to as a partial barrier fence or a full barrier fence. And I've got photos to show you exactly the difference between the two. Basically, it's saying, you know, if it's less than 5 meters away and Y is between 250 mil and 2 meters, a 2 meter drop is huge. Then you'd be putting in a partial barrier fence, but if it's greater than that 2 meters, you'd be putting in a full barrier fence. Similar kind of approach with the gradients or the batter adjacent to the shared path. You've got this calculation, which is 1 to Z. I've got arrows going all over the place on this slide. 1 to Z, for those that have ever done, you know, any of your cross-section longitudinal analysis, that will be pretty common terminology. Or rise over run, for those that remember year 8 mathematics. The slope of the grade, that's just how it's measured. So 1 over Z. And basically, the bigger that Z is, the flatter that it is. So it's saying that, you know, if it's super flat, then we don't need a fence at all. But the steeper that it's getting, we'll either go for a partial or a full. And I'll show you what those differences are there now. So this top image and kind of general arrangement that we're showing here, that's an example of a partial fence. And the reason it's called partial is because there are gaps. There's these little windows where theoretically small children could fit through and fall through. The full barrier fence has got the vertical members all the way through, and there's just no way that you can possibly fit someone through there. Of course, you could still go over that fence, but not through those windows. That's the difference between the partial and the full. In my personal opinion, it's overly complicated. I don't know why they went with this separate categories here. I've seen much more of these full barrier fences being installed, perhaps where there isn't the need for it, but you know, it might just be easier to do, or maybe manufacturers find it easier to install. I'm not really sure. Anywho, that's just my 2 cents on the fencing types. But what is common in both of them is they have this smooth rail or smooth deflection rail. So you can see that the way that that has been designed is it actually juts out. So it sits proud, it extends into the shared path itself. And the way that it is actually designed is if you've got a rider on their bicycle, the height of that smooth deflection rail is kind of between their elbow and their shoulder. So if a rider was to become errant or, you know, start to drift off, the first thing that they collide with is this smooth rail, not any of the vertical members that could snag or any of those little brackets that come out. You know, none of that would be hitting the cyclist. The first thing that strikes is that upper arm area. So that's also referred to as cycle-friendly fencing. And it's just this idea that you just have a single rail that juts out and protrudes so that errant cyclists have got, you know, they're basically colliding with a smooth rail as opposed to any protruding bits of metal. And I can see in the chat there, which I love to see, people that picked up on the placement of this sign. So theoretically, if you were an errant cyclist and you were running along this smooth deflection rail, it's basically guiding you into that sign. So that's really not a good outcome at all. Let's give a prize out there to, I missed the name there, Julio, for mentioning that one. So ideally you'd have all your sign and furniture on the other side of the fence there, because you don't want to just be creating that little, target basically. So you're guiding cyclists to hit that object. Marissa.
So a couple of questions. Is the height of the batter does the height of the batter or what is at the bottom come into play when deciding on a fence or not? For example,
Sorry. Keep going.
no, yeah, we've just got an example, can 0.5 meters offset to a 1 to 3 batter 2 meters high onto a flat grass area.
Okay, so I'm guessing the way that I'm reviewing that is like you might have a batter there and then another drop off. So you could still use this calculation because this is saying anything that's less than 5 meters would be considered a hazard, depending on how big that drop off is. So you may just be combining both of these ones to determine if a fence is required.
Okay, and does the horizontal deflection rail pose a spearing risk to vehicles?
Great question. Let's give a prize out there. And yes, I would say. Theoretically, like they're generally just one long welded piece of steel. So it's not as if, I guess there are joints. So theoretically it could come off at that joint and act as a spearing risk. So you generally wouldn't be installing these adjacent the carriageway where they are operating in that longitudinal fashion, because you could have an errant vehicle drive into that and then the horizontal deflection rail just going straight through the windscreen. So very, very good pickup.
Great, thanks, Max. No other questions, but poor Matt had his daughter fall through a partial barrier fence into the creek. So
Oh,
I think she was okay.
oh goodness. There you go.
That's good. Yeah. We've just had can you run another couple more questions? We've just got them coming in on the chat. What would be an alternative fence type to implement?
So if you were working along the carriageway, generally what you would do is you would install an approved barrier system. So that edge barrier system would shield errant motorists from the shared path traffic. And then there's a few options you can do. You could have on the posts itself, which would be installed within the shared path, you could use little protector caps. So if a cyclist were to clip them and fall onto those posts, they're not just falling onto a metal, I-beam, something like that. They've got a little bit of padding to them, still going to hurt. But you could also do a back-to-back W-beam profile, whereby on the carriageway side, you'd have the barrier system with the W-beam, but also on the shared path, you'd similarly have the W-beam, not because you're expecting cyclists to crash through there with such force, but purely to protect them from those posts that can create snagging risks. So generally, adjacent carriageways, you don't see these smooth deflection rails, you see those barrier systems implemented instead.
Yeah. Okay, we've just got one more. Can a guardrail double up as a fence instead of pedestrian fence if a guardrail is required at that location?
I would say yes. I welcome anyone in the chat to disagree with me. But I think guardrail would be a pretty significant deterrent for pedestrians to, actively cross within that space. So it's achieving that lack of permeability there. But yeah, I welcome your own thoughts on that.
Thanks, Max.
All right. Shared path crossing roads. Now, I've got a little poll here, I believe. And I'll let Marissa launch the poll. And it's very conveniently about fencing. We've had a good discussion around fencing today. So the question I've got is, hopefully you've seen this launch on your screen. Should fencing be installed along this shared path? So the one that I'm showing here. And just to give you a little demonstration, what I'm talking about is, would you put fence here? That's a pretty good drawing. I'll give you 20 seconds to have a go at that. 18 seconds. Love the wayfinding, yeah. Pretty jazzy, isn't it? All right, 5 more seconds and then we'll finish the poll. Don't be too stressed. You're not marked on this. All right, and we'll share the results. And we've got 95% saying no. I would tend to agree. I don't think we need the fencing here. Perhaps those that said yes were considering, well, you said that we need a half-meter offset from the edge of the path, and that signpost doesn't quite look like half a meter, so that's a hazard, and maybe we need to protect cyclists from that. So maybe that's what you were thinking about there. I didn't give you all the dimensions and things like that. However, yeah, generally, I think if you look at the adjacent land there, you'd be falling into vegetation, you'd be falling into grass. It's not going to necessarily cause significant trauma. So not necessarily an instance where we'd be advocating to put in your cycle-friendly fencing. Now, in this previous example, we have got a shared path that actually runs in the median of a divided road. And where the shared path crosses over the median opening, so this is like the carriageway, you can see what's occurring here is the shared path, they get the priority. It's raised. So what I mean by that is basically the shared path is at one consistent level. Shared path users aren't forced to kind of go down onto carriageway level and then come back up. There's no curb ramps or anything like that. And although you can't see it from this angle, there's stop lines and stop signs and things like that for vehicles. So they are forced to actually stop for shared path users. And this is generally what we consider as best practice. Where we do have our shared paths that cross over roads, we want to be awarding that priority to our shared path users. So cyclist priority treatments. Now, depending on which jurisdiction, you'll have a different way of exactly demarcating this. So the example on the left is in Melbourne. The example on the right is from Brisbane. I tend to prefer example number 1, and it's not because I'm closer to this geographically, as opposed to example 2. In the chat, I'd love to see your discussion around why you think I might prefer this left-hand example as opposed to the right-hand example. So example 1 on the left there. Because they are both achieving the same thing. They're both forcing motorists to slow down and give way to shared path users. They both feature the raised crossing point. So in both scenarios there, you've actually physically raised the shared path. So they both have the exact same principles behind it, but there is an element that I prefer with example 1, and it's not necessarily the pavement color. You can see that's come through a few times. Lots of jurisdictions have different ways of coloring their pavements, and I wish that we had a harmonized approach across Australia. We don't. it can actually even differ depending on which LGA you're in. So we're not even at the LGA level of harmonization. As long as it's consistent within that area, I think that's the best principle. But yeah, I'd love to see Australia just adopting one as this is how we do things. Anyway, I can see lots of answers coming up. Yes, sites, angles, viewing angles, confusion about the sign, angle of observation, all these types of things. Yeah, all wonderful answers. Once again, Marissa, I'll let you pick a winner there. I was kind of referring to the site angles for both uses, really. So in this instance here, you've kind of got basically a perpendicular crossing point. So as the cyclist is coming up to this conflict point, they're able to quite comfortably look to their right and check that the vehicle is yielding and make that eye contact. In this second example, if you were riding along here and get to this point, very, very difficult for you to be able to turn right, look across your back shoulder and check to see that that vehicle is giving way. So it's just, physically the way that we are built. Our anatomy is not meant to be able to twist your head like The Exorcist. So it's just incredibly difficult for you to be able to look back that way. And that's generally why I prefer any of those examples where you've got perpendicular crossing points, because you're just opening up your sight lines. I'm really not trying to throw any diss to Brisbane. This is a wonderful path here, the Brisbane Bicentennial Bikeway. And I do appreciate that this project has pretty significant constraints. I just wanted to show that as an example of why we would be looking at trying to make things as perpendicular as possible. And just to show you what this site actually looks like out on the ground, and you can see there's actually quite a lot of these bicycle tread marks, perhaps indicating that riders are kind of slamming on the brakes at the last minute because they are, seeing that this vehicle is not yielding to them and they are forced to, undertake emergency braking. So yeah, just kind of illustrate that as an example. All right, bollards. Now, we do see these incredibly commonly across our shared path network, basically installed wherever there is a carriageway. And whilst historically that has been the approach, wherever, the shared path interacts with the carriageway, install the bollard. I think we need to move away from that philosophy a little bit, because we need to acknowledge that these things are hazards. So we talked about before that anything half a meter away from the edge of the shared path is considered a hazard. Well, these things are placed right in the middle of shared paths. So they are definitely, considered a fixed hazard for cyclists. Now, really common ones are, just using these types of vertical bollard shapes. You may have reflector tapes or things like that on it. The reason that you may have this middle one included as well, because surely the two on the outside would be enough to stop vehicle entry, is to stop kind of monkey bikes or any of those dirt bikes entering. To me, that is perhaps one better achieved with enforcement, because this is a 24/7 hazard for all shared path users or cyclists within that area. Whereas the risk of monkey bike users could be once a month at specific times, and you've got to weigh up what's a more significant risk. Anyway, this is a very poor example of a bollard where you're actually using materials that blend in with the surrounding environments. So the nice aluminium or whatever metal that is against the bluestone there. Just super confusing. And also in this specific scenario, it's actually not that close to a carriageway, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to have them here. The reason that they would be there is, well, from what we discussed, would be just to ensure that garbage vehicles and things like that do access this promenade don't go any further than this point here and access the bridge. But I just feel like if that's the reason you're installing bollards, can you not instead have within, the contractor that's doing that work, their swims or their JSAs, the way that they operationalize their activities, this is where I am able to drive and I cannot go any further than this? Or could you have it even, geospatially mapped out, like this is physically where I can only drive, those types of things. I think just having this idea that you can just put up bollards wherever you want because that will help it fails to see the side from those that ride, that have to continuously interact with these features and collide with these features as well. This last one is the banana bars, sorry. They're no longer installed. They were quite popular back in Brisbane, but they're actively being ripped out because they kind of create this awkward little pinch point. More bollards. I've got lots of bollards. Sorry, guys, stay with me. Timber bollards. This one is like a chicane treatment. And generally, I think they can work quite well. They certainly slow down cyclists as they're approaching a conflict point. However, what I have seen is them become very narrow. And if you were a cyclist and you were riding, say, a cargo bike, or you had a bike with a trailer, you actually might run into trouble of getting through there and navigating this. This one isn't too bad. This is relatively wide, but there are really, really narrow ones where it's physically impossible to take specific bicycles through those features because, the swept path just does not allow for that. So they've got their pros and cons as well. This one is just an example of like a U-shaped bollard. That one is heading into Hobart there. And yeah, I just always use the analogy of, imagine if, we had the traffic lane that was approaching the rail line and we just put a bollard in the middle of the traffic lane and said, you got to slow down here. Just be really careful because there's a big hazard coming up ahead. Like, it's just, there's no way that that's how we would treat that. So we've got this idea that bollards are we have to do it everywhere. And yeah, I think we need to just take a deep breath in and think about our risk profile. What's more common to occur? Is a vehicle going to enter this space, or is it more common that frequent injuries will occur for our cycling community? Now, to give you a bit of an appreciation, I have included this as an example. This is Andrew here, and a few years ago, he ran into this bollard. This is just right down from our office on the Upfield bike path. You can see by looking at that bollard that has been struck many, many times. When Andrew collided with it, he fell off his bicycle, broke bits of his face and his wrists and things like that, and called up the ambulance. And as he was waiting for the ambulance to arrive, he saw 3 other crashes occur within that 40-minute period of cyclists riding into that bollard. We have a record of one of those crashes. So you can go into the police reports and you've got a hospital record of a cyclist that's crashed into the bollards, but those other 3 that occurred on that day, we don't know about. So we know that cyclist crashes are very, very well underreported, and yeah, cycling community don't necessarily know that they are able to report things like this.
Yeah, thanks, Max. There's lots of chat about bollards. We've just got one question. What would you recommend instead of bollards? So if you need to prevent vehicles from illegally accessing an area, but need to allow for occasional maintenance vehicle
I love that. I've got a slide just for that. So let's give a prize out there for reading my mind.
Great, thanks.
So this is a really, really more promising solution for this space. And the way that I view it is, imagine if you were, if you're a traffic engineer or you're in the road design space, you've got a local street that's approaching a major thoroughfare and you want to raise the awareness of that intersection. The humble splitter island has been used for decades, and I think that's also what could be in stalls where our shared paths are interacting with the road network. And the way that it could actually be implemented is you could use landscaping to act as that splitter island. You could even put a bollard in the middle of that splitter island if you've got adequate space either side of that to help the delineation. But this much more clearly demarcates, that there's a change occurring, there's access to the carriageway coming up, there's a conflict points, and also will help to significantly detract vehicle entry at those locations. So much bigger fan of this. This is from the Austroads design. If you want to take this and adopt this as your own, by all means. One example that I could find, and I really would love another example. So if you've seen anything that looks vaguely like that, not just a bollard, please let me know, because I'm really on the hunt for better examples. But this is an example of Gardner's Creek Trail out in the southeast here. And they've got this kind of grassed splitter island being used here. They are using bollards, but there's a reasonable offset there that kind of demarcates the space. I actually really like these bollards because they are they've got solar panels on the top of them, and so get all that delicious energy during the day, and then during the low light conditions they're able to project illuminance onto the adjacent shared path, which is very handy. So this is an indicative idea of what a shared path end treatment could look like, trying to utilize a bit more of that landscaping to help deter the vehicle entry in combination with physical measures. You could also install like low-lying bushes and things like that. Got any native vegetation that you want planted, you could start to create a little community planter garden thing there or something like that. So anyway, that is more of ideally how we could be able to treat these things. Now, in saying all of that, and as I touched on with the ramp for the overpass, we still are required to adhere to our DDA requirements, so our Disability Discrimination Act. Because these are shared paths, they're not exclusive cycling infrastructure. We do need to think about those who have disabilities and may interact within that space. So in particular, when we're thinking about shared paths crossing over roads, what is most important is the grades that we've got adjacent that section, the sight lines that we've got at the conflict points, as well as the use of tactical ground surface indicators. You'll get some writers that say that they're the worst thing ever and they're terrible, but I have not seen any research that would back up that statement. And anecdotally, I think you just write over them and they're fine. Admittedly, some products are slipperier, but there's lots of manufacturers out there that are able to install friction TGSI panels there. So just wanted to make that clear that we still are required to achieve our DDA requirements there. Alrighty, now I've got another little interaction activity where I will get all of you to have a look at our photo here, and I ask you, what's wrong with this photo? Now, I've got a very confused cyclist there, and it's your job in the chat to tell me why she would be confused. Now, I'll get rid of her and I'll check in with Marissa. You're on mute there, Marissa.
Yeah, good old mute. While everyone's popping their answers in, we've just got like a few questions on bollards, on alternatives. So I'll just shoot a few of them over to you. So is there an alternative to bollards where there's a geometrical constraint so a splitter island can't be used? Or you need garbage access for bin cleaning? What can you do instead of bollards where there's no space?
So
Yeah.
the splitter island would feasibly be able to install and still access any maintenance activities, because you could just drive over that splitter island, just either put a removable bollard in there or something that's flexible. But yeah, in terms of the more constrained space, yeah, it's always a difficult environment, and no, there isn't one easy solution that's going to fix that. Yeah, just trying to highlight the conflict point as much as possible, and yeah, I probably would have to look at that in a bit more detail.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks,
Awesome.
Matt.
No worries. Lots of good answers coming through.
Lots come through, lots on priority, no signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, priorities unclear. Giveaway lines, no line marking, no bollards, no wayfinding. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we'll give a prize out, Marissa, to the person who wrote the lack of wayfinding signage. But we'll give it to the person that mentioned that the third time. So not the first person, because you might just be a little bit slower at typing, but that doesn't mean you don't get a prize.
Yeah, we're inclusive, so we're here for the slow typers as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So the lack of wayfinding signage, this is a real example of my anecdotal ride here. And I got to this fork and I was like, I have no idea where to go. And it's just super annoying. It's not really a safety issue, but just having a little, pole there where you can see exactly what leg will take you where. So I don't have to get off my phone and then check my GPS and then take a photo of it and then create an elaborate cycling course so I can passively be upset about this. Anywho, yeah, so we're not very good at doing our wayfinding across Australia, and something that we could improve. So just a reminder that, it's not necessarily a safety thing, but it does add to the amenity and the comfortability for riders that are using that. But also the priority. We'll give a prize out there that mentioned the priority. Let's go number 5. The 5th person that mentioned priority there, Marissa. Because as you rightly have pointed out, it's very unclear who would give way to who. What we would instead recommend within this space is assign a priority leg. So say that this is the thoroughfare, and then treat the other one as more like a local leg. We'd love to see this intersection squared up, and you can just get rid of all this, just grass all that. And then put in a stop sign, so it's just very, very clear. Okay, this is the leg that has the priority, and if you're coming off here, you have to yield to other path users, because you don't want to create that ambiguity. You want to make it very clear. Now, Austroads has actually completed a document, a research report on bicycle wayfinding, which generally speaks volumes of how important they consider an issue. When they've commissioned a research report and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on looking into a topic, it's generally pretty relevant. So it acknowledges that we're not very good at doing bicycle wayfinding here, and every jurisdiction does have a different approach of it. So this has just got some really good guidance. It's really nothing groundbreaking. Like, you're not going to be reading this and being like, oh, of course, I should put the bicycle symbol on there, and I should include the distance, and where it's going to go. Like, it's not far out thinking. It's just, in my opinion, something that's just been forgotten along the way. We always remember our street signs and our directional signs for traffic, but yeah, the cycling kind of wayfinding is less of a priority, or just forgotten about. In other jurisdictions, they are much, much better, and a really, really common way to do to kind of demarcate their routes is to use numbering systems. This image that I'm showing here on the left-hand side is in Copenhagen, and you can see bicycle route number 2 to the left. That will take you from the train station all the way to the town centre. So if you don't speak the language, you know you can just follow number 2 and you're going to get A to B where you want to go to. And similar approach here in the Netherlands, where they've also just included distances there as well. I've also seen used, you know, the time that it would take to actually ride there. So rather than say 10 minutes, just say, sorry, rather than say 10 kilometers, just say 20 minutes or whatever. Yeah, anyway, just a few ideas there for you. Now, where we do have that conflict with shared paths and other shared paths, you may need to implement kind of speed management treatments just to ensure that you're not having one thoroughfare just going at it and, you know, creating an uncomfortable scenario where you've got high speeds at the conflict point. So this is an example at City West train station over in Perth, and it's a bit difficult to see, but this is where like the pedestrian boom gate, I'm sure there's a real word for it, I just don't know it, please tell me. You know, where the pedestrian gate closes over the rail section because the train is going past, and then it opens up and you've just got this flood of pedestrians crossing over here, and they cross over here and then they go up here to get to the platform and get to this train station. So what they've actually installed is, because this is also coinciding with where the bike path is, the shared path, they have installed this little splitter island here. They've installed a bit of curb and channel and some brickwork, as well as the green conflict paint, as well as the pavement marking there, which says give way. Installed all these things just to communicate to riders that as you're coming up to this area, there's something significantly different. This isn't just part of your you know, mid-block section. You can expect to see there's going to be lots of pedestrians flooding through here. So we really want you to slow down and pay attention. Now, I think it's a little bit of an interesting approach that they went with this kind of design. I think it's, I'd be interested to see if it was ever evaluated for effectiveness. But I do know, anecdotally speaking to those that have been on this course and are very familiar with this, that you still do have riders traveling through at high speeds, and it is still quite uncomfortable for both pedestrians and riders here. Perhaps another solution within this space would have been to create kind of a wombat crossing, for those that are familiar with that term. I'll try and do a 3D drawing, but probably won't end too well. But basically just creating a raised crossing point for pedestrians, and as riders ride along here, they get this kind of ramp, so they're kind of forced to slow down. You know, that you wouldn't want to hit that at speed because it would feel uncomfortable. It would not be as steep as I've shown in that illustration, but that idea of using vertical deflection to physically slow down that throughput of vehicle traffic, and yeah, award the priority to pedestrians that are crossing over in that space. I think that's another way that you could treat these environments. There's been lots of pavement markings and signage and things used to communicate to riders that, hey, there's pedestrians here, you need to slow down. But I think it's really, really limited effectiveness, particularly these ones on the footpath, because by the time a rider actually reads that, they're basically on top of it, and it's just, yeah, not necessarily going to solve the problem just by using that, but I guess it's showing that you're trying to communicate that message. Marissa?
Max, we've just had someone pop in that they ride past this every day. That cyclists go really fast through here, as it is part of the Fremantle Line Principal Shared Path, the very popular main commuting route. Luckily, not many people cross over here at one time. And just a few questions. Would pedestrian priority be recommended in this case?
Yes. So similar to what I was suggesting with this kind of diagram, if we had this as like a wombat crossing or just a raised zebra crossing, and awarding pedestrian priority there, I think that would be a good way to deal with that conflict.
Yeah, and there's a few comments suggesting that would be good to have changing colour at the crossing point so it wasn't all green. Would rumble strips be an option on approach?
Oh, good question. I've certainly seen rumble strips being used. Once again, I could not give you an X percentage of this is how much they reduce the likelihood of crashes occurring or anything like that. I haven't seen any evaluation to suggest that it's going to be more or less effective than what I've shown here. However, anecdotally, yeah, I think they're great. I think they do a good job. I think they really raise awareness that there's a conflict point, and also they do provide that little bit of a haptic warning. So haptic just means like a physical sensation in your handlebars that you're kind of approaching something. So even if you're not looking down at the ground and you don't see the strips, you would feel it and be like, oh, I should probably slow down or do something. So yeah, I do think rumble strips can be effective.
Okay, thanks. That's all.
Chill. That's the end of the content for today. I did want to spend some time just going through our learning management system, as I mentioned at the start. Before I close, though, I just appropriately wanted to address how we design for the end of our shared paths. And this is a real example. Unfortunately, putting up the shared path end sign is not enough. We've got to think of these things strategically and, think of our shared paths as corridors that connect journeys, and very unlikely anyone's endpoint is this quadrant of the intersection. In fact, you'd hope it isn't, because there's not a lot of happiness going in there. But just having a real think of where you're ending your shared path. Does it connect in somewhere that is coherent, makes sense, and will actually be relevant to the cycling community? And even if it means, ending this project 100 meters beforehand and tying it into another path, I think would be a better outcome than just leaving the cyclists here and forcing them to turn around. Anyway, I'll hop into our learning management system. So hopefully you've seen this and this looks familiar. If not, spend some time at the end of this session, get yourself set up, because it's really, really important for all your coursework. First thing that we've got is just a bit of a welcome. If you want to say hello and introduce yourself, where you're coming from and your level of experience, feel free to reach out. It's nice to see who's online, and nice to hear how you find riding in your area, or if you've never ridden a bike, that's completely fine too. We've got this tab here, which is resources. Everything that we reference within this course is saved in reference document and resources. So I'll just click on that now. So all the Austroads guides, all the jurisdictional papers, research papers, I just bulk download everything there and then just create a little folder on your desktop with bicycle reference. That's what I do. And that way you just always got it there. You don't need to worry about Googling things afterwards. So that's in the resources tab. We've also included the safecycling.org.au. That's the Amy Gillett Foundation website, where you can get more information about that program and all the work that they are doing. The Global Designing Cities Initiative. That was the resource that I mentioned previously, where I said we don't actually house this on our website because they like to keep track of who's downloading their stuff. It's a big file. I think it's like 300 meg or something like that. It's like really high quality, and 600 pages or something like that. You could just download that and you'd be pretty across what the whole world is doing in terms of bicycle infrastructure. It's good from the strategic stuff all the way to the, what radius curb should I use? We're in a 60-kilometer environment, lots of detail as well. So strongly recommend downloading that one. There's also a video there from someone from GDCI about that. So have a view of that. I should confirm, we are by no way affiliated or sponsored by them. I just really like their resources. So we're not paid to say this. They're just doing some good stuff. If there's any resources that you've got from your jurisdictions that you would like to share with others, please do. We often get people that share like how you do wayfinding within your jurisdiction, and you might have a specific guideline, or how you manage speeds at conflict points with pedestrians. This is how our shared paths would look. Anything like that, feel free to upload it. Could be useful for others that are also working within that space. Now, of course, today's module has been Module 1, Off-Road Cycling Facilities. And what you'll see is there, you'll get the PDF, which is that document there. We've got this link here, which is VR 360-degree video, Module 1, Shared Path. And if you click on that, and click on that again, it will take you to a video which is 360 degree. Now, for those that have never used this before, all you need to do is you just grab the little hand and you can click on it and pan around, and you can view the video just like Google Street View. So you can look up in the sky and look at the birds and look down, and you can see this is Ken and myself, and we're just having a little bit of a chat. And then at the end of the video, halfway through the video, we actually ride through some different examples. So you can see what it feels like to ride in these particular scenarios, okay? Prior to our next session, which is Thursday, we'll get you to watch this video. So we'll just probably be easiest just stay on at the end of this session and just smash out this 4 minutes and 13 seconds. Just so we can get your feedback at the start of Module 2. So we'll get you to watch that video prior to our next session. The other thing we'll get you to do is the quiz. So at the end of today's session, we've got Module 1 quiz. Now, if you click on that and you click on Attempt Quiz, that is going to take you to the questions. You've got 9 questions there. You've got 3 attempts at this. And if you are struggling to get that 80% or higher pass mark, then please reach out, because we'll be happy to help you there. That's the learning management system. So hopefully I've covered that off quite well. And if you are having any issues, please reach out to the training team. Marissa.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Yeah, if you have any issues logging on to the learning management system, please reach out. Happy to reset your password or resend you your login details. So please let us know. Would you like a few questions, Max, before we finish up?
Let's do it. Hit me up.
We've just got some discussion around the last slide that about the crossing at the train. I think it was like a train.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've just got a bit of discussion around that one and who has priority there. Some suggesting pedestrians, and then others, suggesting that the green paint suggests that riders will have right away. What are your thoughts there?
There is a bit of confusion, and it's interesting to hear that we've got that ambiguity. But yes, on shared paths, pedestrians have priority everywhere. So pedestrians would have priority at this location.
Okay. There you go. Ainsley?
Yeah, Max, I've got one for you that's just come through on the Q&A. Just if there is any guidance for shared use path crossings where there's domestic driveways, and some guidance on the site distance requirements. So this participant's just mentioned that they're having to squeeze the shared use path, and when they calculate the minimum gap site distance, it's never adequate. So the shared use path can't always be delivered where it does cross domestic driveways.
Yeah, okay, good point. Okay, so we do, in Thursday's topic, talk a little bit about bidirectional separated paths and how they conflict with either driveways or access points or things like that. The only space where I've seen a jurisdiction nominates what is an appropriate sightline requirement is over in North America, and it is the MassDOT bike lane planning design guide document. Quite happy to forward that on if you want to email me the specifics of that location. But by and large, we rarely achieve those sightline requirements adjacent those driveways or crossover areas. So, yeah, it's just a difficult constrained space to be working in.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Max. And then I guess another one just in terms of some general kind of design features. If it's something that's not, I guess, included in the Austroads guide, is there any other resources you would recommend referencing or checking out to find some specific design details? So things such as, I guess, reverse curves, minimum radiuses, and things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, so we do have lots of those international research and guidelines documents included within the LMS that I just pointed to before. A lot of that would probably have that detail that you required. But yeah, you just have to make sure that you flip everything over because they drive on the other side and they probably could be using feet instead of meters. So there is a little bit of translation required. But yeah, there's definitely some good resources in the LMS that we can link you to.
Perfect. Thank you, Max.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for your contributions so far. I won't be here on Thursday, sorry, but Ken will be running you through the next module. Yeah. Any final questions there, Marissa? Or?
We've just got one that's come in.
Yep.
Do cyclists have priority over pedestrians on a dedicated cycleway, so not a shared path?
I would have to double check my road rules, but I don't think so. I will double check that and get back to you. And let Ken answer that on Thursday.
We've just got a question. Where do we enter the Wally Wombat counts? Once you complete your quiz for today, there will be a question in there to pop your answer into. So keep an eye out for that one. That's about it for today. Thanks everyone for your participation. Been a great interactive group, lots of questions. Thank you, Ainsley, for answering all of those questions in the Q&A. And thanks so much, Max, for presenting.
No worries. Happy cycling. Come a few minutes earlier on Thursday because we'll be running some trivia and chance to win a prize. Yeah.
Absolutely. Jump in a few minutes early.
Toodles. Have a lovely day.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you, everyone.